What happens when Hollywood's most legendary action star comes face to face with late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Harrison Ford sits down with Stephen Colbert and delivers one of the most shocking statements ever heard on late-night TV. This show needs to be canceled, and frankly, you're the reason why. The explosive confrontation that followed left audiences stunned and industry insiders scrambling for answers. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The Late Show started like any other, but within minutes, the atmosphere in the Ed Sullivan Theater had transformed into something resembling a battlefield. Harrison Ford, who rarely does television appearances, had agreed to sit down with Colbert to promote his latest project. What was supposed to be a straightforward conversation about his decades-long career quickly devolved into one of the most heated exchanges in late-night television history. The tension was palpable from the moment Ford walked onto the stage. Unlike his usual appearances where he maintains his famously gruff but charming demeanor, there was something different about the legendary actor. His jaw was set, his eyes had a steely determination, and when he shook Colbert's hand, it was brief and perfunctory. The audience, sensing something was off, gave a somewhat muted applause as Ford settled into the guest chair. Colbert, ever the showman, tried to break the ice with his typical opening banter. "Harrison Ford, everyone, the man who made us all believe we could survive in a refrigerator during a nuclear blast," he said, referencing the infamous scene from Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The audience chuckled, but Ford's expression remained stone cold. "Stephen," Ford said, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone, but with an edge that hadn't been there in previous interviews, "before we start talking about movies, I think we need to address something more important." Colbert's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Oh, what's on your mind, Harrison?" "I'm talking about the state of television, specifically late-night television, and how shows like this one have contributed to the degradation of public discourse in this country." Ford's words hung in the air like a challenge, and you could practically hear the collective intake of breath from the studio audience. The host's eyebrows shot up, and for perhaps the first time in his career, Stephen Colbert appeared genuinely caught off guard. "I'm sorry. Are you suggesting that my show is somehow harmful to public discourse?" Ford leaned forward in his chair, his intense gaze never leaving Colbert's face. "I'm not suggesting it, Stephen. I'm stating it as fact. Night after night, you sit behind this desk and mock, ridicule, and tear down anyone who doesn't share your particular worldview. You've turned what used to be entertainment into a platform for divisiveness." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Colbert, recovering from his initial shock, tried to deflect with humor. "Well, Harrison, I think you might be confusing me with my old character from the Colbert Report. That was satire, this show is." "Don't," Ford interrupted, his voice cutting through Colbert's explanation like a knife. "Don't insult my intelligence or the intelligence of your viewers by pretending this is somehow different. You've simply traded one form of character assassination for another." The audience was now completely silent, unsure whether they were witnessing an elaborate bit or a genuine confrontation. Camera operators zoomed in on both men's faces, capturing every micro-expression of this unprecedented exchange. Colbert's famous composure was beginning to crack. His hands, which usually gestured expressively as he spoke, were now gripping the edge of his desk. "Harrison, I respect your right to your opinion, but I think you're being unfair. This show celebrates diversity of thought and—" "Celebrates diversity?" Ford's laugh was devoid of any humor. "When was the last time you had a guest on this show who challenged your political beliefs without being treated like a circus act? When was the last time you approached a controversial topic with genuine curiosity rather than predetermined conclusions?" The accusation hit its mark. Colbert's face flushed slightly, and his voice took on a defensive tone. "I think you're oversimplifying what we do here. Comedy has always been a way to process difficult." "Process?" Ford stood up abruptly, causing several audience members to gasp. "You're not processing anything, Stephen. You're feeding people exactly what they want to hear. creating echo chambers that make real dialogue impossible. You've turned late-night television into a propaganda machine. The word propaganda seemed to echo through the theater. Colbert's producers, visible in the background, were frantically gesturing to their host, but he seemed determined to defend himself. Harrison, that's a serious accusation, and frankly, I think it's completely unfounded. We bring on guests from all walks of life. We discuss important issues, and yes, we do it with humor because that's what this format— The format is the problem. Ford's voice rose, and for the first time, his legendary cool completely evaporated. You hide behind comedy to avoid accountability for the damage you're doing. You think because you get laughs, you're not responsible for the consequences of your words. Colbert stood up as well, his own anger now visible. What consequences? What damage? We're a late-night talk show, Harrison, not a news organization. People watch us to unwind, to laugh, to have their biases confirmed, Ford shot back, to feel superior to people who think differently than they do. You've weaponized entertainment, Stephen, and the worst part is, I don't think you even realize you're doing it. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. Two titans of their respective industries stood facing each other across the iconic desk, neither willing to back down. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would push both men past the point of no return, leading to revelations that would shake the very foundations of late-night television itself. Colbert's face had turned a deep shade of red, his carefully maintained television persona completely shattered. You know what, Harrison? I've had enough of this sanctimonious lecture from someone who's made a career playing pretend for a living. At least I'm honest about what I do. The personal attack hit Ford like a physical blow, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. Pretend? You want to talk about pretending, Stephen? Let's talk about how you pretend to care about your audience while you manipulate them night after night. Manipulate. Colbert's voice cracked with indignation. I give people information. I give them perspective. You give them your perspective, Ford corrected, his voice now eerily calm in contrast to his earlier outburst. And you package it as entertainment, so they swallow it without question. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's indoctrination with a laugh track. The studio audience was frozen in their seats, many with their phones out, recording what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. Security personnel had moved closer to the stage, though they seemed uncertain about whether to intervene in what appeared to be spiraling out of control. Colbert slammed his hand down on his desk, causing his coffee mug to jump. You're completely out of line, Harrison. This is my show, and I won't sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks he's above the very medium that helped make him famous. Above it? Ford's laugh was bitter. I'm trying to save it from people like you, who've turned it into a weapon. You've taken something that was supposed to bring people together and used it to drive them apart. That is such complete nonsense, Colbert shouted, abandoning any pretense of professional decorum. We highlight injustice. We call out hypocrisy. We shine a light on. You preach to the choir? Ford interrupted, his voice echoing through the theater. When was the last time you changed anyone's mind about anything? When was the last time you brought understanding instead of division? You don't illuminate, Stephen. You inflame. The accusation seemed to strike a nerve, and Colbert's composure cracked completely. You don't know what you're talking about. You live in your Hollywood bubble, making your action movies, completely disconnected from real people and real problems. Disconnected? Ford stepped closer to the desk, his presence imposing. I've traveled this country, Stephen. I've met people from every walk of life, every political persuasion. And you know what I've learned? They're tired of being told what to think by people like you, who believe they have a monopoly on truth. A monopoly on truth? We fact-check everything. We research. We verify. You cherry-pick facts that support your narrative? Ford shot back. You present half-truths as complete stories, and you do it all with this smug superiority that makes people feel stupid if they dare to question you. Colbert was visibly shaking now, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of his desk. You're describing something that doesn't exist. We're comedians, Harrison. We make jokes about the news. If people can't handle that, there's nothing funny about what you do, Ford said, his voice deadly serious. You've weaponized humor to avoid accountability. You hide behind comedy when you're called out for your bias, but you demand to be taken seriously when it suits your agenda. The tension in the room was suffocating. Camera operators continued to film, capturing every moment of this unprecedented breakdown in civility. The audience sat in stunned silence, many looking uncomfortable as they witnessed two public figures tear each other apart on live television. My agenda? Colbert's voice rose to near shouting levels. My agenda is truth. My agenda is justice. My agenda is calling out corruption wherever I see it. Your agenda is ratings, Ford fired back. Your agenda is maintaining your relevance by feeding people exactly what they want to hear. You've turned late-night television into an echo chamber, and you've convinced yourself that you're doing something noble. Colbert stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward. How dare you? How dare you come on my show and attack everything I've worked for? Someone has to. Ford's voice boomed through the theater. Someone has to tell you that what you're doing is destroying the very fabric of civil discourse in this country. You've made it impossible for people with different viewpoints to have honest conversations because you've taught them to mock and dismiss rather than listen and understand. The personal nature of the attack seemed to unlock something primal in Colbert. His face contorted with rage as he pointed an accusatory finger at Ford. You're lecturing me about civil discourse? You're the one who came on my show with the sole purpose of attacking me and everything I stand for. Because someone needs to, Ford roared back. Someone needs to hold you accountable for the damage you're doing to this country's ability to function as a democracy. The word democracy seemed to trigger something in Colbert, and his voice took on a dangerous edge. Don't you dare lecture me about democracy, Harrison. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you care about this country when you've spent your entire career making escapist entertainment while real people deal with real problems. Ford's eyes flashed with genuine anger. At least I'm honest about what I do. I make movies. I don't pretend they're something more than they are. But you? You've convinced yourself that your partisan comedy show is somehow essential to democracy, and that delusion is exactly what makes you so dangerous. The exchange had reached a fever pitch, with both men now standing and facing each other across the desk like gladiators in an arena. The studio audience was completely silent, many appearing visibly uncomfortable as they witnessed this complete breakdown of the traditional talk show format. But what neither man realized was that this confrontation was about to take an even more explosive turn, one that would expose truths about the entertainment industry that neither was prepared to reveal. Colbert's producer, visible in the background, was frantically making cutting motions across his throat, signaling for the show to go to commercial break. But Colbert, consumed by rage and pride, ignored the desperate gestures from his team. His voice reached a new level of venom as he launched his most personal attack yet. You know what I think this is really about, Harrison? I think you're bitter. I think you're a washed-up actor who's angry that nobody cares about your opinion anymore, so you come on my show to get attention by starting controversy. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Ford's face went completely still, his legendary composure returning in the most dangerous possible way. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with such intensity that every person in the theater could hear every word. Washed up? Ford repeated slowly, his eyes never leaving Colbert's face. You want to talk about being washed up, Stephen? Let's talk about your ratings. Let's talk about how your show is hemorrhaging viewers, because people are finally seeing through your act. Colbert's face went white. My ratings are fine. We're competitive in our time slot. Competitive? Ford's laugh was merciless. You're getting crushed by reruns of game shows. Your demographic is shrinking every month because younger viewers see right through your outdated political theater, and older viewers are tired of being lectured to. The personal attack on his professional success seemed to break something fundamental in Colbert. His voice became shrill, desperate. You don't know what you're talking about. This show matters. We make a difference. We influence. You influence, Nothing, Ford exploded, his voice echoing through the theater with such force that several audience members actually flinched. You're a relic, Stephen. A dinosaur clinging to relevance by repeating the same tired talking points night after night to an ever-shrinking audience of people who already agree with everything you say. The brutal honesty of the statement seemed to physically stagger Colbert. For a moment, he looked genuinely hurt, vulnerable in a way that his audience had never seen before. But that vulnerability quickly transformed back into rage. "Get out!" Colbert said quietly, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "What?" Ford asked, though he had clearly heard. "I said get out!" Colbert screamed, pointing toward the exit. "Get off my stage! This is my show, and I want you gone!" Ford smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Your show? This pathetic display is exactly why this show needs to be canceled. You can't handle even the slightest challenge to your worldview without having a complete meltdown on live television." "Security!" Colbert yelled, his voice cracking. "I want him removed from my studio." But Ford wasn't finished. He turned to face the camera directly, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. "This is what passes for discourse in America today, folks. This is what happens when you dare to question the narrative. You get screamed at and thrown off the stage." Security personnel finally moved forward, but Ford held up his hand. "Don't worry, I'm leaving. But before I go, I want everyone watching to understand what they just witnessed. This is a man who preaches tolerance and open-mindedness, but the moment someone challenges him, he resorts to personal attacks and censorship." "You attacked me first," Colbert shouted, his professional facade completely shattered. "You came on my show specifically to humiliate me." Ford turned back to face him one final time. "I came on your show to tell the truth. The fact that you consider truth to be humiliation says everything anyone needs to know about your character and your show." The studio audience was now murmuring among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Some were standing to leave, others were recording with their phones, and a few were actually applauding Ford's words. Colbert, seeing that he was losing control of his own audience, made one last desperate attempt to regain the high ground. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disgraceful display by my guest. This is not what The Late Show represents." "No," Ford interrupted, his voice cutting through Colbert's words like a blade. "This is exactly what The Late Show represents. Intolerance disguised as righteousness. Division disguised as unity. Propaganda disguised as comedy." He began walking toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one final time. "And Stephen, when this show gets canceled, and it will get canceled because America is tired of this toxic garbage you're peddling, remember this moment. Remember that someone tried to warn you that your emperor's clothes were invisible." Colbert was left speechless, standing behind his desk with his mouth hanging open as Ford strode purposefully toward the stage exit. The security guards, unsure of their role in this unprecedented situation, simply stepped aside as the legendary actor passed. As Ford reached the edge of the stage, he paused and delivered his final devastating blow. "You know what the real tragedy is, Stephen? You could have been great. You could have used your platform to actually bring people together, to find common ground, to heal divisions. Instead, you chose to be part of the problem. History will remember you not as a comedian or a talk show host, but as someone who helped tear this country apart for ratings and applause." With that, Harrison Ford walked off the stage and disappeared into the wings, leaving Stephen Colbert standing alone behind his desk, facing an audience that was no longer sure whether to applaud or remain silent. The camera captured every second of Colbert's humiliation, his face cycling through emotions from rage to confusion to something approaching despair. For several long seconds the theater was completely silent. Then, slowly, scattered applause began to build from sections of the audience, not for Colbert, but clearly in support of Ford's message. The applause grew louder and more sustained, forcing Colbert to gesture desperately to his producers to cut to commercial. But the damage was done. In less than 20 minutes, one of late-night television's most established hosts had been completely dismantled by a guest who refused to play by the unwritten rules of celebrity interviews. The confrontation had exposed the fundamental weaknesses in Colbert's approach and left him looking small, petty, and unprofessional in front of millions of viewers. As the show finally cut away, Stephen Colbert slumped into his chair, his head in his hands, while somewhere in the distance, Harrison Ford was already making his way out of the Ed Sullivan Theater, having delivered one of the most brutal takedowns in television history. The episode would be talked about for years to come, cementing Ford's reputation as someone willing to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences.